Hey, good evening. Yeah. Let me try that again. Hey, good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU-LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is the way too loud Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know. Is that good? Fixing everything on the fly here. I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Yes, it is. Views expressed are those of the speakers. Yes, they are, and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or UPTV. No, they aren't. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself, and me, myself, and I. That's it. That's all you've got. That's all you're going to get. Take it or leave it. That's all I've got to offer you today. It's just me, myself, and I. Yeah, so wasn't here last week. Sorry about that. Was out of town. I'm back on the air. Apparently I've forgotten everything I ever knew about radio. I was like turning things up and down and off and sideways and trying to figure out how everything worked. I still don't know that everything's working, but it seems to be on. Test, yes, seems to be on. It's a little loud. And you don't probably hear that, but I am seeing it on various meters. It probably sounds the same to you even after I change it, but it's showing up differently to me on the recording of the audio, and that's why I keep saying that and doing that, and yes, and stuff like that. So, what is going on, you ask? Yeah, well, I don't know. Like lots of things are going on. Things seem to be sort of heating up on the Mueller end of things. So once the election ended, all the immigration stuff that had been so in the news, just like in your face every day, it went away because obviously they were, that most of it was election-related stuff. And so, the horrors of the migrant caravan and all that stuff, it just, that all just disappeared because that was only there to drive certain people to the polls. It didn't really have any other purpose. So, suddenly immigration has sort of dropped off the media radar, I suppose, primarily because the election, obviously, and because the prez, I don't know what to call him, that guy, Mr. Orange Face, he's got other things to worry about right now. So he's worrying about other stuff, like, am I going to jail? I hope so. And things like that. So bashing immigrants and doing all that, like really, what do you call it? Executive ordering that he does from time to time. That's all just trying to get that same, sadly far too large, but still mainly minority group that supports him, keep them riled up, So it can be difficult to look at what's going on from one week to the next and sense any real trend anymore. I mean, there was a time when there was sort of like, okay, things are going in this direction, but with Sessions out and various interim people in, I think Whitaker is the guy in there right now, and he's kind of trying not to be too obvious because there are some problems with him, obviously. obviously. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but there's some problems with him. So I think he's trying hard to sort of operate under the radar so that he doesn't get too much attention on him, because if he does, he's in trouble. Trump has nominated an old Bush attorney general to reprise his role, and he's not a great guy, but I don't think he could be as bad as Sessions. Bad in the sense, I mean, he may be every bit as awful a person, although I kind of doubt it, because Sessions was a pretty awful person. But Sessions was both an awful person and an effective person. And as we spoke about in our post-election show, one of the really good things about the election, or that timing and all that, was Trump has been waiting a long time to get rid of Sessions. So getting rid of him was such a good thing for all of us in so many different ways that even though whoever is going to take that place is obviously going to be a negative person in terms of let's see, how may I count the ways? Well, one would be obviously this notion of I'm a real law and order guy, by which they mean we're going to turn up the heat on a certain segment of society and turn it down on others. So white collar crime, that's going to go way to the back burner. Street crime, things that we associate with people of color and marginalized people, that's going to be turned way up, because that's what basically inspires their constituency. So whoever goes in there is going to be that sort of person until Trump is just totally out of office and we have a Democratic president again. That's going to be pretty much a consistent feature of both the Attorney General and just every kind of judge or anybody that gets put into any kind of position of power. That's the sort of person they're going to be. So we can't look to them for any kind of improvement in the attitude of law enforcement around the nation generally. But that peculiar combination of effectiveness and evil, I guess I could call it that. I mean, I feel confident in calling Sessions' intentions evil, a lot of them. Others may differ with that, the strength of that term, but whether or not no. I mean, of course he didn't see it that way. Nobody sees themselves as being evil unless they like the idea of being evil, unless that appeals to them for some reason, in which case they celebrate their evilness, kind of. But that's a sort of a rare individual that has that strange way of looking at things. For the most part, most people, even people that we would generally call evil, imagine themselves as being virtuous. They think that what they're doing is good and that they are doing good things for others or for everybody or for the people they care about. Let's put it that way. Because a lot of the time what creates evil the most is someone... I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself, but there's a strange sound in the background. I don't know what it is. It sounds like someone, I don't know, like there's a steamroller rolling down the hallways of the IMC or something. Maybe it's a music. I can't tell. But anyway, it's very loud. You probably can't hear it, but I can hear it here, and it's very distracting. Anyway, what I was talking about, evil, and virtuosity and people imagining themselves as being virtuous, but really producing evil. A lot of the time that comes from notions that people have about who is deserving of good and who isn't. So they will select a group and say, well, I'm going to support this group and take care of them at any cost. And those costs usually come out of the pockets, the figurative pockets of other groups that, besides that, so-called chosen one. And so with someone like Sessions, for example, I think he saw his constituency very clearly, older, white, conservative, religious. There's certain, kind of outline to the people he saw himself as protecting and working on behalf of. And so in order to do that, he saw the necessity to be against certain other groups, which, most of us who like to include everybody would think that, you would, to do good would be to do good for all those different groups, regardless of their ethnicity or their religion or their social standing or any of those things. But there are people, and I believe Sessions was one of them, and I know Trump certainly is, who imagine who very narrowly defined who is worthy of protection and support and who isn't. And that's where a lot of these problems come from. And with immigration, that is a big part of the story, again, is who deserves support and protection. Well, for so-called nativists, that would be citizens, exclusively, no one else. The government works for the citizen. It supports the citizen. It protects the citizen. It does everything. Anybody outside of that has no rights, apparently, or at least no rights here. You can have rights in your own country, but if you come here, you've got none. It's like by coming to this space, you've given up your humanity in some way. And that's really disturbing. But that's kind of how they seem to think, and that there's a consistency to it up and down the line that makes it pretty much a common feeling in many countries. It's like, well, we are protecting what is ours. Ours by virtue of, I guess, being born here is the only thing. And unless, of course, your parents, if, the so-called anchor baby logic, unless your parents happen to not be citizens, in which case being born here doesn't make you, doesn't give you any special privileges or rights according to this way of thinking, which is weird. Like, why, if I had a child, why would my child have some special quality that the child of the family next door who just happened to not have citizen parents wouldn't have? And of course, there's none. It's just all ways of trying to decide who is on the inside and who can be excluded. And the more you try to figure out ways to exclude certain populations, the harder you will try, and the more you'll stretch logic and reason in order to make your point. So anyway, I found a handful of stories here that I thought might be worth reading. So the first one, this is from the New York Times, and it's entitled, UN Approves Sweeping Deal on Migration, but Without U.S. Support. I don't know if you've been following this, but they've been working on this for a while now, and of course the U.S. has been pushing back against it, as you might imagine, because of who's in charge right now. So the story reads as follows. More than 160 countries adopted a sweeping international accord on migration on Monday, after the United Nations Secretary General robustly defended against the myths and falsehoods that critics had directed at the deal. Addressing a two-day conference in Morocco, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, noted that disinformation had inflamed debate on the accord, the global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, and had encouraged a rash of rejections by some governments. 165 countries gathered in Marrakesh approved the agreement by consensus, defying the United States and other countries that had withdrawn, citing concerns about migrant flows and national sovereignty. The decision in Marrakesh is the culmination of nearly 2 years of consultations and negotiations to produce an accord to promote international cooperation in handling migration. It will return to the United Nations next week to be formally adopted by the General Assembly. The text of the accord was approved in July by every member of the United Nations except the United States, but it has since gotten caught up in a nationalist movement in Europe that has centered on the issue of immigration and prompted around a dozen countries to reject the compact outright or to pull back from endorsing it in Morocco. Mr. Guterres dismissed as myth number one the idea that the accord would force countries to adopt migrant-friendly laws and regulations. The compact is not legally binding, but instead proposes a roadmap for cooperation that explicitly recognizes state sovereignty and governments' right to decide their own immigration policies. Moreover, Mr. Guterres said regulated migration is needed if developed countries are to maintain economic growth when they face declining birth rates and aging populations. Coordinated action can also combat the high human cost of unregulated migration, which is exploited by predatory smugglers. More than 60,000 migrants have died in hazardous journeys while trying to reach wealthier countries, Mr. Guterres said. This is a source of collective shame, he added. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, a 34-page document, asserts that, quote, no state can address migration alone, end quote, and outlines 23 objectives. They include the collection of better data on the movement of migrants, the strengthening of legal paths to migration, efforts to combat human trafficking, and cooperation to ease the safe return of migrants to their countries of origin. It doesn't say migration is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a thing. Louise Arbour, the United Nations official who led negotiations on the compact, told reporters in Geneva last week, emphasizing the need for the international community to address and mitigate that global reality. Work began after members of the United Nations, including the United States under President Barack Obama, approved a declaration in 2016 saying that no country could manage international migration alone and agreed to work on a pact. But the Trump administration withdrew its support a year ago, saying that parts of the compact were inconsistent with U.S. immigration and refugee policies. Under Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a fiercely anti-immigrant leader, Hungary has dismissed the compact as a pro-migration document. Austria, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovakia have also rejected the compact, as have Australia and Israel. Over the weekend, the government of Prime Minister Charles Michel of Belgium lost its majority in Parliament after its biggest coalition partner, the right-wing Flemish Party, left in opposition to the planned approval of the migration agreement. Slovakia's Foreign Minister Miroslav Lajcek, who presided at the United Nations General Assembly in July when the organization adopted the compact, said last week that he would resign after the country's parliament rejected the accord. Switzerland said in October that it would approve the pact, but reversed course a month later, saying that it would not attend the conference in Morocco or adopt the compact until its national parliament had debated the issue. Days later, Italy, now led by a right-wing anti-immigrant government, took the same position and said it would not sign anything until lawmakers had their say. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany has vocally defended the migration agreement in the German parliament, but she has faced criticism for her stance on immigration from members of her party and, like her counterparts in France and Netherlands, she faces pressure from parties on the far right. Resistance to the compact has largely fed on fears that it would force countries to throw open their borders and extend welfare benefits to new arrivals, which opponents say would draw enormous flows of people from abroad. We are not establishing a new right to migrate, Mr. Gutierrez insisted on Monday. What we are establishing is the obligation to respect the human rights of migrants. Most migration is not from south to north, but between developing countries, he said, seeking to dispel other falsehoods and noting that there were more African migrants in other African countries than there are in Europe. Moreover, migrants provide a boost to the economies of their host countries as well as to their countries of origin, he said. Migrants spend 85% of their earnings in the countries where they work. They spend the remaining 15% home. They send the remaining 15% home in remittances, providing vital lifelines to developing countries that add up to 3 times the value of official development assistance from richer nations. The compact presents an opportunity to fix a global approach to migration that is broken, that is failing hundreds of thousands of people every day. Francesco Roca, president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, said in a statement, adding, "The work starts now." So this is something to think about. Like, what is it exactly that people reject about migration? What is it about immigrants and migrants that they think is so bad? Often this is phrased in terms of the economy, with economists generally saying, on the one hand, that migrants and immigrants are good for the economy, and with nationalists saying, on the other hand, that no, they're terrible. They take from us. They take our jobs. Somehow, immigrants manage to take jobs from citizens, and at the same time not contribute anything to the society and become a drain. So somehow they are both at the same time taking jobs and throwing themselves on social welfare, which is obviously impossible, but somehow, according to nationalists, they manage to do this. And therefore, they are both job stealers and welfare bums at the same time. So really, when you start to logically take these things apart, they usually don't hold up with any kind of, to any kind of scrutiny, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You can't look at them logically and say, okay, what are the arguments against migration and immigration generally? And they're mostly just be afraid because these people are different and they're coming in and who knows what's going to happen. That's really generally what it kind of boils down to when you tease apart all the various points and you try to think of what is, valid and what is a real concern. So, okay, let's say immigrants come in and steal jobs. Well, first of all, they're not stealing anything. They're coming in and looking for jobs. Jobs are being given to them. So somebody is making the choice, should I hire this person who was born here or should I hire this immigrant? For some reason, those people are making the choice to hire immigrants. And that's where this notion of job stealing comes from, is that immigrants come in and they suddenly get all these jobs. Well, someone is giving them those jobs. It's not like jobs are just growing on trees and whoever gets there first and picks one gets the job. It's, it's a whole process that's happening. So another argument is that, well, they drive down wages because they're willing to work for less. Okay, this could be a valid argument up to a point. The jobs that immigrants tend to get are not high-paying jobs to begin with. They, except in the sense of construction. You see a lot of immigrants working in construction. So in that sense, yes, they could be driving down wages to a certain extent. But there again, someone is making this decision to pay them. And if they are willing to do this work for less money than the person that was doing the job before, then that would seem to be a very capitalist notion there. The free market speaks. The person who's willing to do the job for the least is the one that gets the job, according to the free market. So you kind of can't have it both ways. Either you want some control over your markets. You want some say over who gets paid what and when, in which case you should be supporting unions, for example, or you want the market to go whichever way it goes, in which case whoever's willing to do the job for less will probably get it, assuming that they do as good a job as you do. You do. I can't talk today. So a lot of these things, when you start to like examine them closely, they fall apart, or they at least crumble to a certain extent. So yeah, an influx of people willing to work for less will tend to drive down wages in jobs that people can do, that anybody can do, that you don't need a special education or communication skills or whatever. Now, presumably, the ability to be familiar with the local customs, the local social norms, the local culture, I guess would be a broader way of saying it, and to speak the language fluently, all those things should give you a leg up in terms of finding jobs in the area that you live. If the only thing that your employer is concerned about is how much money they have to pay you, that kind of falls into the employer's lap in terms of whose fault it is that someone else is able to take your job because they're willing to work for less. If you have skills, if you work hard, your familiarity and your ability to communicate effectively with coworkers and bosses and such should be a bonus point in your favor, assuming that the boss cares about anything other than just how much money they pay. So I would say that if cost is the only deciding factor, then there's a bigger problem here than people coming in and taking jobs for less money. There's a problem with how the system works generally. But, you know, people don't like to think about things with that level of complexity. They like to think of them simply. It's like, I have job, you come, you get job. Now I don't have job. It your fault. You know, it's like just down to the most basic. What's different here? The fact that this person has my job and now I don't. I don't know that that's very wise, but I don't know, again, that people are very wise as a rule. So anyway, here's, speaking of migration, though, at least on this topic, this is, I should point this out. I should bring this up because this bears thinking about when you think about the topic of migration. So this is from the Texas Observer, I believe, and it's entitled, How Climate Change is Driving Central American Migrants to the United States. And so it says, Donald Trump thinks there's an immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. He has no idea what's coming. Thousands of Central American migrants arrive at the border each month, fleeing both grinding poverty and unchecked gang violence. Increasingly, they're also escaping a threat that they might never mention to immigration agents: climate change.